most of the research focus is going into figuring out how we understand what the limit is before we push the guy off the cliff. So everything is about, we want to train you as hard as we possibly can before we kill you. Literally, but
so as much intensity as possible without breaking you, as much volume as possible without breaking you.
So in order to do that, we're trying to find clever ways of increasing the intensity without incurring the cost, increasing the volume without necessarily running into injury risk and so forth, which is simple sometimes. It just means slow down. And then the third one is figuring out how we measure how close to the cliff you are, and that seems to be where most of the science is going. And the English have done some amazing work on testosterone and cortisol in the saliva, and it seems that's probably where the answer is going to come from. Well, it's the focus area at the moment.
Is
looking at the testosterone levels, because with the stress of training, obviously that's coming down, cortisol's going up, and they've managed to pretty much fingerprint each athlete's testosterone level.
Because I know traditionally in the world of endurance sports that male marathon runners have the lowest testosterone levels. Probably because of the stressful nature of doing miles and miles and miles of running.
But of course, again, that's inaccessible to 99% of the world's athletic population.
Exactly, they can't push
who can't measure their testosterone levels, and who probably don't need to. So for them, the simple thing is just how well are you sleeping, how well are you eating, and how well are you recovering from one day to the next.
And I think a very important one that's been quite well researched: how much fun are you having?
Well, so you're emotional.
The more you enjoy it, the more you do it, and the more you do, the better you get. So, but if it's a slog,
all this undersells science, because a scientist wants to come up there and sound clever. And to stand in front of an audience of coaches and say, listen, guys, forget about heart rate variability. Forget about trying to monitor your EEG in your brain while you sleep. And I mean, the lengths guys go to is pretty extreme. Just fill in a questionnaire and ask yourself, am I having fun? They'll run you out of time in science. Because it's supposed to be complicated.
It's supposed to be.
And so the more we know, the more we kind of crave complexity. But the solution comes from simplicity. That's the paradox. It's a challenge for science.
And simplicity often in endurance sports is a question of consistency. And consistency to me speaks of mastery. So you had situations where a typical program for a miler or for a 1500 meter runner would be 10 400s with 1 minute recovery, and then you get athletes that can do those 10 400s in under 60 seconds, but they can't run a sub 4 minute mile. So they've mastered the workout, but have not been able to transfer it. And other athletes do that in 61, and they end up running a sub 4 minute mile. So Ledyard was right when he said, we know what we're doing because we're seeing the results every day. The scientists will eventually end up telling us why we know what we're doing.
Exactly, and that's the problem, is we're all chasing mechanisms. And people will do things before they're understood.
And I think that's what...
And there's so many, sorry to interrupt you, there's so many, like icing after exercise, compression socks, there's so many things that athletes do without any scientific basis. And it's actually really frustrating for me in an academic environment to run up against that kind of resistance.
In the world of coaching, in the practical world?
No, more in the world of academia.
Okay.
Icing doesn't work, so don't do it. Well, altitude training is for a long time been the same thing, right? And now you had this study, I think it was last year, might have been early this year, I've lost track of time, but the Danish-Swiss group that found that altitude training is a placebo effect. I don't know if you saw that study.
Well, I mean, a long time ago they said that altitude training, they still couldn't prove it, and they found that people isolating themselves, taking themselves away from their home environment, doing this dramatic shift, and committing them might have been the reason why it happened, not the altitude.
So they it was a study by Lundby, who's done quite a lot of interesting work on altitude and the brain and so forth. But they basically had a group of guys who they told were going to be at altitude, and they weren't in an altitude house. And sure enough, they get the same physiological responses.
Wow.
And Christopher Gore, I think, has found the same thing. So, again, that's a question of science trying to chase an answer, which athletes swear by.
Exactly.
Now, the difficult thing is, and same thing goes for icing, compression garments, lots of different things that teams and athletes do, is does it matter if it's a placebo effect or a physiological effect? And scientists don't seem to understand that it doesn't. So colleagues of mine will say, don't do it, like don't ice, it's not helping. if there's even a 1% chance that it helps, as long as there's no downside, you do it.
Did you see this Japanese research that showed that icing actually slows down adaptation or reduces adaptation?
So would anti-inflammatories.
Well,
so then when that starts to enter the equation, now you've got an upside to icing, which is questionable. In other words, is there a benefit? Maybe not. But there might be a downside. Then you have to make a difficult decision. But provided there's no known downside, you should still do it. Compression garments, for example. There's I can't think of the downside.
No. Well, funnily enough, I have a marathon runner down in Santa Fe, a pretty good age group marathon runner, amateur marathon runner. And I don't know if he put his compression socks on incorrectly. They were not sleeves. They weren't calf sleeves. And he had terrible pain in his feet, and it might have been a vascular issue.
Circulation thing,
So
so then again, we're back at the same place we began. It is individual responses.
Are different.
So now, as the coach or as that athlete, he's got to do an experiment. He's got to say, let me get a size larger. If that doesn't solve the problem, let me not run in these things. And he's answered his own experiment.
In my work with mechanics or with things like compression socks or anything like that is very often the result that I'm getting is a very pleasing result, but it's not a performance result. It will eventually lead to a performance result. Let's say icing or a higher stride rate or using compression socks leads to you feeling better the next day, and eventually you feel so much better the next day you can start doing back-to-back runs on the same day, or you're a 3 times or 4 times a week runner, and now you can run 5 times a week, and that increased training is improving performance. But all this work on mechanics and stuff hasn't improved performance, but it has improved trainability.
So that's another example. Same thing of if something is working for the athlete perceptually, then let's keep going with it.
So what would be a final message to the average runner and the average triathlete out there in terms of sports science?
Well, I think the simple thing is people must embrace complexity, and that means that your warning alarm system should start sounding immediately when someone tells you this is the answer. Because and scientists who say we had it wrong before, that's not true. All they mean to say is that we weren't quite 100% right before. So it's being able to discern, am I seeing a polarized, oversimplified message? Because 100% of the time that will be wrong. It's just too complex. And so it's people must embrace complexity, and they must understand that they are a complex system. And so therefore every single thing that they do, whether it's a new training session, whether it's ramping their mileage, whether it's starting track, doing hill work, changing shoes, icing, nutrition,
different mindset,
everything we've spoken about, right? They must recognize that if they make one logical change at a time and measure the outcome, that's how coaching and athletes and science should work. That to me is the perfect marriage between them.
But then also don't throw away the variability of the extrinsic environment as well, comparing the same heat day to the same heat day, the same humid day to the same humid day.
At the office, the family's giving you grief, your wife's in your ear, your kids are having suddenly you're going to have a bad tempo run. It's like, just understand the big picture, So it's to embrace that big picture and also at the almost microscopic level, that complexity, and to avoid the desire of people to sell you books and so forth, ideas that are oversimplified.
And that's you also crusade, and that you also take as gospel.
Because it's got a guy who's got 3 letters behind his name, or is a doctor. I mean, that's
so back to know thyself.
Exactly. And not necessarily know, but learn thyself. That for me would be
a lifetime of
a process of figuring it out,
of self-discovery.
And so therefore you must try and understand a little bit. You must know one thing about everything, but you must also understand everything about one thing. So it's like you have to understand, if you're serious about improving your running or your cycling or triathlon, you have to be aware of what's out there. And this is a method that Bangsbo is using. He's doing these 30-second sprints 10 times, and he's finding that endurance performance is going up as a result of sprint training. Think about that and say why. And would I benefit from that? And implement it. And if it works, you keep it. If it doesn't work, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
All right. Well, let's have a little discussion about that at a later stage, and then leave this one where it is.
So it's just embrace complexity, ask questions liberally, and answer them cautiously and logically.
be an
and if
experiment
you do that,
one.
and if every single week you learn one new thing about yourself, after 5 years you've learned 260 things. You'll be a better runner.
Yeah.
You have to be.
Yeah.
Even if you've learned,
you applied them.
Even if you learn what doesn't work.
Yeah.
You filter out and you add what works, and you improve. So
that's some research that educationalists have been discovering with the difference between Eastern kids and Western kids, is that the Eastern kids completely embrace failure and struggle with performance. That's a direct connection.
Correct.